Hey folks, how are things? Karl O'Brien here from StoreHero. Welcome back to the StoreHero podcast. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Ollie from Prospa Media, a leading e-commerce marketing agency working with brands such as Hair Syrup, Hex Food, Maison de Fashion, and Really Wild to help scale and do so with profit in mind. Ollie, thanks very much for taking the time today.
Thanks for having me, Kel. Excited to be here.
Likewise, likewise. I suppose no better time to kind of kick off and dive into the I suppose the key topic of the moment, which is kind of Q4 planning. I think people are
Yeah.
kind of coming back off breaks, August kind of downtime and right back into the swing of things in terms of planning. How is the kind of day-to-day agency wise? Is that, I'm sure that's kind of top of mind in terms of kind of client conversations at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I think each year we seem to start prepping earlier and earlier. And I think that the earlier you prep for Q4, the more advantage you can take of it. The time where loads of brands have got an opportunity to kind of make up for maybe performance through the year not been as good as it should have been. A massive influx of new customers, and then also kind of accessing and engaging your current customer base. So if you prep properly, you understand your winning creatives ahead of time from an acquisition standpoint and that paid social, and then you can also frame all your warm campaigns in your email. So yeah, this is when all the ecom brands kind of button down the hatches and get to work. But yeah, the prep starts kind of now.
Definitely. I suppose to dive right into it, I suppose for last year, for 2023, was there any particular key points that stood out that maybe looked relatively commonplace, or any common trends across clients that you're kind of approaching this year with that in mind?
Yeah, I think last year we put a lot of the Black Friday creatives into existing campaigns. I think this year we'll probably kind of look to change that slightly, so maybe run our own campaigns on the side of it after kind of running through creative testing through that. It fell on a weird day last year. I can't even remember exactly what it was, but payday came a few days after. This year, I think it falls in a nicer way, so it'll be interesting to see what happens. I think SMS is going to be a big tool for us this year, just because it's so instantaneous, the way in which we can kind of reach out to people and let them know about the sale. So yeah, I think hopefully it should fall better this year than it did last year, and I think SMS is going to be quite a big tool.
Interesting. Yeah, I know, like, even I suppose Ireland and the EU are kind of a little bit behind on the SMS side, but it's definitely something we're seeing across kind of other brands we're speaking to. I think one piece that's maybe this year is a little relevant as well is the fact that I think it technically falls later. So as year on year comparisons are naturally going to, as they always do, going to need to take that kind of time period into account. And as that kind of weekend now runs into December, it's kind of maybe it might adjust people's expectation for November, December. I don't know about you. I think my expectation is that people will just continue to again go earlier, and kind of not necessarily defer. Okay, we'll wait and get those sales in December. They'll still go gung ho, and then potentially look to kind of capture some additional upsides in December.
Yeah, it does seem to happen each year, doesn't it? Where people can try and kind of steal a bit of that sale period. I think we will see it again this year. It's been quite a weird year in ecom, especially in D2C. So I think it's the chance for people to make back up some revenue that they might have left on the table to this point. But yeah, running right through to December, I think as well the way in which Christmas falls this year should be quite beneficial.
100%. Maybe just to kind of take a step back, it'd be great to kind of get a little bit of your origin story in ecom. How did you get into it, and maybe how has it brought you to the place where you're working with, the nature of caliber of clients today?
Yeah, it's a funny story. So I actually had a few different kind of marketing roles before. I worked in the SaaS space. And then I was at a party from over Leeds way. I was at a party in Leeds and I was boring someone to death about marketing. And he just said, stop talking to me. You need to speak to Jack. So Jack had founded the agency in his university bedroom 2 years prior. Had a bit of a chat and we really kind of hit it off. And he said, well, why don't you move to Manchester and we'll kind of, bring you in. I didn't really know where I fitted in the agency at the time. So yeah, moved across to Manchester and kind of started, and I've just kind of found a place at home as creative director now. So I oversee a lot of that kind of the commercial conversations, partnering with different tech partners, and then kind of all the marketing and lead gen of the agency. But yeah, it all came from kind of a drunken conversation at a party.
Like the best things do, and maybe the worst things do as well. But
Yeah.
nice, nice. No, that's really interesting, and I think it's everyone. I think there's a lot of conversations we have with people who kind of stumble in. It's not as much of a strategic plan, but obviously such a dynamic space. You're kind of always whatever where you come in, you end up in the deep end pretty quickly. So, like, I suppose in those last couple of years, be great to maybe get some perspective on yourself and around what changes you've seen, how maybe client expectations have changed, what it kind of have priorities shifted, or is there any kind of broader trends you've seen?
Yeah, I think it probably started around 18 months ago, but the biggest change has been it's not been in media buyers' favour. And I think it's what it's meant, and it's the importance of creative that's come through. And it means that, media buyers are no longer media buyers, but more so they've become creative strategists. And I think that's been the most eye-opening thing for us. And as an agency, we had to move quickly because ultimately, if we're getting poor results and we're unprofitable for clients, then they're going to leave. And we've got a great churn rate here. And what we had to do is respond to the changes in Meta predominantly, and hire a graphic designer and a creative strategist. So what that's allowed us to do is to just be really agile in-house in terms of making creatives. It's not just paid social as well. With Performance Max coming through for Google, it's so much more creative heavy. The email team that we've got here at Prosper as well, it starts from kind of ideation and straight to graphic design. So it's all about the design from every aspect of ecom at the moment. And I think it's only going to get more so like that. Within paid social accounts, the biggest change has just been that now creative does the targeting. I'm getting fed up of hearing that phrase, because everyone's throwing it around. But yeah, that's been the biggest change. And I think the brands that do well are the ones most responsive to that change, that creative change.
Definitely. It's something we've seen ourselves as well as, traditionally maybe you had a lot more levers at your disposal. And again, to your point, it's probably in a more traditional media buyer's favor where the targeting and behavioral kind of strategy was as big an animal, maybe as creative. And as
Yeah.
Advantage Plus, PMax have kind of taken more of the lead there. The creative, as you've said, kind of remains that kind of primary lever that maybe businesses can use to actually scale. And it's obviously it's a lever they have, but it's so variable as well. And it's
Yeah.
like the operational process behind it is significant. So I suppose when you start working with a client, how does that process typically start? Is there particular cues or clues you're looking at within their accounts to kind of get an understanding of where they sit? Are they kind of reaching their potential? Are they kind of maybe overdoing it, maybe passing their ceiling? What are the maybe couple of signals you look at in order to look at things through that creative lens?
Yes, good question. I think before even kind of considering whether or not we're going to work with somebody, we always audit. So we always want to see behind the scenes and in the weeds. And it's unsurprising the amount of brands that you go into and there's little to no creative testing, or at least they're not doing it in a way in which it's trackable. And if you can't track it, there's no point in doing it. So I think that's the first thing we check out. The second point is probably that, it doesn't mean that when a new agency takes the reins, it doesn't mean that they need to turn everything off. I think that's, counterintuitive. There's always going to be some positives within some accounts. So I think it's outlined the creatives that are working, or at least the campaign structure that is working, and then plan through a kind of a research process where you do a lot of social listening to find the right creative concepts, and then look at how we're going to implement them and test them. So yeah, I think there's this idea that you're just going to turn off the old agency ads or the kind of the ads that they were running before, but I don't think you have to. I just think you've got to find the benefits within that, outline the creative test you're going to run, and then go from there.
Definitely. And again, as you said, like data is data, it's going to help inform that position. And if you're completely starting from scratch, you're oftentimes kind of working backwards. Sometimes it might be needed, but, maybe, more harm than it's worth in some cases. So I suppose looking at that kind of, that approach, trying to find a balance between kind of picking out the good and the bad and kind of building a bit of plan for success. Is there particular problems you see pop up whereby their overarching performance that maybe ROAS is the indicator for success that they as a business owner or kind of ecom manager might see as the success or failure? Naturally, that's going to be a sum of its parts around creatives, campaigns, ads. When you see that kind of per overarching performance, do you tend to see particular reasons to that? Is it creative frequency? Is it the quality of creatives? Is it I presume it's going to be a mix of a couple of things.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the more conversations I have, and I speak with hundreds of ecom brands each year, is that we're making more revenue, but we're not making any more profit, and that seems to be kind of the commonality at the moment. And I think a lot of that is because they don't know how to analyze the creatives properly. So we use a tool called Motion, which for anybody that doesn't know, it's an amazing creative analytics tool. This allows us to look at kind of the CPA. I mean, just one metric there, let's just look at, but the CPA per creative in a really granular way. And then look at kind of the forensic makeup of each creative and the relative performance of each kind of metric. This allows us then to kind of work out where they're becoming unprofitable on an ad basis. Now, that's only possible by doing unit economic analysis at the start. And I think so many agencies will kind of go gung-ho and think, well, I want a 5 ROAS. Well, actually, when you need to look at kind of the CAC target and why. And I think, so yeah, it's probably a lot of that is that they don't understand kind of the margins or at least the unit economics of the way in which they should set up their account, but they're not focusing on CPA as the main kind of driver. So ultimately, if you've provided you've got good stock, you can spend as much as you want if you're below that CPA target.
100%, and that's really where I think a lot of people don't know where they sit, because if they're just using, maybe there's a ROAS target kind of floating around internally
Yeah.
because it's been something they saw over this weird COVID environment, or
Mm.
it's just this number that's been kind of floated around. It's not really weighted in truth, and like we often see it on the StoreHero side, like we have kind of a similar in the concept of motion with our creative overview, and oftentimes people actually are maybe underserved by saying, I need a, okay, I maybe they're panicking anytime the ROAS is under a 5, but they'd often be a lot better driving more scale, driving
Yeah.
more orders with a lower ROAS, which is a hard, it's tough to kind of actually kind of introduce that idea sometimes if someone is so used to looking at one particular number.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think then they also, even kind of just focusing on CPA or ROAS, is you forget to understand kind of like your churn figures or your repeat rates in them cohorts. And like, you can spend a lot more if you know that the lifetime value is going to be increased over that 8-month period. Or, for example, especially in like kind of a subscription model, how do you then incorporate that into your CPA target? We just started working with a brand called All Week. They're kind of a meal supplement brand. And not a meal supplement brand, like a meal prep brand that you can order kind of set meals cooked by Michelin star chefs. Now they're on a subscription model. Well, what that allows you to do is then look at the unit economics and be a bit more bold with certain targets, and then by tweaking certain things like a really high level email flow or, for example, a well targeted campaign, you can then increase that lifetime value and give yourself more CPA to play with. So there's things you can do that aren't within the paid social account to help your paid social metrics too. And I think that's something that people need to look at it as a whole ecosystem.
Definitely. And it's in that scenario you're kind of saying, okay, maybe reducing CPA isn't the only solution here. If it's a case where
Mm.
we can justify a higher CPA with a better quality customer, or, better, lifetime value through revenue or profit, that's such a difference. So like,
Yeah.
even to just double down on that point, would you have a typical rule of thumb that, okay, some businesses are going to say we need to be profitable on first order. Some are happy to be break even. Some are happy to be loss making. As you said, it's got to be very industry specific. Do you have a typical rule of thumb as to how aggressive someone should be, or even some trends maybe from clients? Do you see any commonalities there?
Yeah, I think the rule of thumb we focus on with a direct to consumer brand with a CAC LTV ratio is kind of 1 to 3.
Sure.
And that leaves us in quite a good spot, at least if you start there. Now, naturally, subscription models bring in a whole different like swath of things you can look at. But yeah, we kind of aim for that CAC to LTV ratio of 1 to 3, and that allows you to kind of go for it. I mean, one thing we're doing at the moment for a brand called Hair Syrup. Now these guys went viral on TikTok, but what we've been able to do is drag them onto Instagram campaigns, and it's been really successful. Is a focus on increasing the AOV at that first purchase point. So we've been
Mm.
creating creatives around bundles in its own campaign. After finding the winning concepts, putting that into this new Big Advantage Plus campaign. So targeting first purchase profitability through creative more than just kind of with kind of a well-led offer. So yeah, I think kind of focusing on that CAC to LTV ratio, but then also, if you can strive for first purchase profitability, that's where you're going to scale quickly. And I think that increases the speed at which you can scale.
100%. And that's the thing. There's obviously a cash flow implication as well of not being first order profitable,
Yeah.
whereby that's potentially tied up, or again, equally, it might be worth your while. So every CPA isn't equal, every AOV isn't equal as well to that point.
Yeah.
So yeah, great point. I suppose in terms of the kind of flipping around on its head, when you see the kind of a really well set up account, what are maybe some of the green flags versus the red flags? And what are those positive components that really signal to you, okay, we're not only, performing well in a ROAS context, but we're setting ourselves up for success? Is there particular kind of creative metrics at a creative level that you keep maybe top of mind?
Yeah, creative metrics. There's certain benchmarks we aim for, like a 30% thumbs up ratio, just as a standard. And I think we're suckers for naming conventions. So it sounds a bit dorky, but like if we go in and we see a naming convention, a creative testing campaign, yeah, I mean it gets our media buyers going. So I think I've seen a naming convention. So there's obviously methodology behind what they're actually trying to test. Consolidating campaigns as well. Facebook does better with more spend, with more data. So having quite a consolidated campaign structure, unless you're spending, over 50K a month where you can kind of afford to kind of spread things a bit more, then I would see a very consolidated campaign structure as an indication that they're doing things right. But I think a naming convention is probably one of the biggest indications that they're tracking things, and it's methodical.
Definitely. And I suppose the adverse is if everything looks like a mess in terms of the names, it's usually not a signal that everything underneath is going to be pretty well optimized as well.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. And it's always quite interesting to look at like the edit history on ad campaigns and see actually how much is done. You want to be in there every day, really, and just seeing what's happening, being responsive to the data.
Definitely, 100%. I suppose with that in mind as well, I think not only, I suppose you made a point there on the creative testing side. Would you have any particular reference points or see commonalities as to how much a client should spend on separate creative testing campaigns versus maybe letting Meta or, Google in some context do some of the heavy lifting within the existing ones? Probably depends, I would guess, on kind of business size and level of spend to a certain extent.
Yeah, so it depends massively on spend, and I think that also tells you how many different new creatives you need. So we create content in-house for the brands we work with. Now, if they go over a certain threshold of spend, then we have to then create more content for them. Just the nature of the fact that Facebook has more money, so it can kind of spend it on more placements. So yeah, I think we always run a test for kind of 7 days. Now that can change based off spend. I think we try and run at least kind of 4 tests per week on a kind of anything below a 10K spend. As a minimum, just as kind of a guide. But naturally, as you spend more, you can then afford more creative testing. Interestingly, as well, when you spend more, you can then have probably more campaigns that has your winning concepts in. And we've started looking at doing this for like product lines or collections. For example, with like a furniture brand, you do dining tables would have its own separate campaign to kind of shelving. So provided you get a bit more spend, you can consolidate within kind of ranges and collections a bit more.
Definitely, and I suppose each of those kind of products or collections will kind of come back to that previous point around that kind of CAC to LTV. They'll have different purchase frequencies and kind of be able to set expectations differently for those.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we use a unit economics calculator. And I always make the point when I explain it to a brand that we can do this kind of on an average basis across the store, which is always quite useful. But then we want to do kind of product or collection based, for a whole range. If you've got more of a clearer idea, because naturally, margins change per product, especially in kind of a furniture space or consumables, it can often change. So yeah, it's always really important to be very clear as to where you're profitable on each different product. And then, that can determine the KPI benchmarks for each kind of big campaign you're running.
Definitely. I think one piece that people definitely, agencies as a kind of concept or as a sector, you're going to have different types of businesses who'll, make that decision between in-house and agency. And I think often a lot of this context is so valuable for an agency that they might not actually see, or sometimes I think it's changing, but clients were traditionally quite resistant. But like even based on everything we're talking about here, the more there's a clear understanding as to what the true value of a customer is, the better decision you as an agency can be in order to make a decision as to how much we should pay for them. So I suppose with that in mind, are there any what's the key if you're giving advice to a brand who's looking to engage an agency? What's the kind of information that you really value that kind of puts you in the best position to succeed typically?
As a brand.
So yeah, as well, more so as an agency. If you're
Okay.
kind of, if you are, if you're an agency, what is the information that's suppose most beneficial to you to get from a brand for you
Yeah.
to do your best work as that agency?
Um, Knowing that they've got an understanding of the financials is really important. So kind of where they understand what their margins are, even kind of a fundamental understanding of what LTV is to start with, sometimes can be a good indication that they know what they're talking about. But having somebody who's kind of financially responsible within the business that you can grab 20, 30 minutes with during onboarding is kind of really useful. I think content capability, or at least the understanding that content is so important, helps the conversation as well, because you're setting off from a point of view where they understand they're going to have to access the content we create, and I think understanding the benefits behind creating such a vast amount of content too. But yeah, being financially aware in understanding of the importance of creative. Those are the two big kind of ethos alignments for Prosper.
Nice, yeah, really interesting. And like even to jump on, I suppose one of those points, the kind of the willingness to kind of invest both in terms of time and cost in new creative versus maybe a quarterly photo shoot or whatever the traditional approach, seasonal photo shoots or whatever was maybe more so the case a couple of years ago. In terms of the approach to kind of those new creatives, how do you feel brands or agencies should kind of balance iterative testing on single creatives, optimizing for that better hook, or kind of tests new concepts maybe more broadly to try to kind of go from zero to one to a greater extent?
I think if you do the right research, the concepts should kind of reveal themselves to you. So what we do is we'll start by, and this goes from onboarding, but we'll do this as a continuous process. But we'd get the top 4 ads that they've ever had, or in the last 90 days. Have a look at them, what's worked there. Then look at competitors, the direct or indirect competitors. What are they doing in their ad libraries? Then do a lot of social listening. So what's happening in Reddit forums? One example of this, we had a ski wear brand, and people were asking questions. They're called Usk Skiwear. People are asking questions on Reddit about the quality of their suit. Well, we knew then if we reverse engineered a kind of a benefit-led creative, then we're going to then convert that type of person. So reverse engineering things from pain points from social listening, doing all the research in terms of what works, the USPs and what's going on in different products, then kind of present themselves to you as separate concepts. Now, then you kind of test the concept and then look at the fundamental metrics within this creative. So your thumb stop ratio, your hold ratio, click-through rate, click to purchase. You can do it quite forensically then. For example, if you're satisfied with the thumb stop and the hold ratio, but the click-through rate's not so good, well, let's look at the CTA. And then you sort that out, and then the click to purchase is down. Okay, maybe it's the landing page, and you sort out each of these metrics incrementally over this period of testing. Ultimately, you're going to get to a winning point, or at least a better point from where you started.
100%. And as you said, like it's really a sum of its parts. A video isn't just a, video creative or even a static creative to a certain extent isn't necessarily just a binary. It works or it doesn't. It's,
Yeah.
there's so many different variables in it. And again, I suppose, as you said, at the original point, if like someone in a media buyer position can understand those components, break it down and be able to kind of take action on them with a consistent cadence, it obviously, it's a massive help. No, that's fantastic. I suppose just to kind of bring the conversation to a bit of a close, and as we said, as we started, Q4 is on the horizon. People are looking to kind of take a lot of these principles, both internally and by way of their agency, to like actually get things going and make sure they can kind of realize the value of Q4 that they think they can. Um, how would you see? I know you mentioned potentially testing kind of separate versus integrated campaigns. Are there any kind of broader points that people should keep in mind through the lens of creative for that kind of Q4 period specifically?
Yeah, through the lens of creative, I think don't wait until that Thursday before Black Friday to try and find your winning concepts. You should be kind of testing them now, and have a very clear idea as to what your audience is going to respond to. I think if you're going to be running sale campaigns and at quite a big discount, then adjust all your unit economics. What's that going to mean from a CPA point of view? I think people can get so caught up in just trying to sell through Black Friday. They forget where their contribution margin should be, particularly when you're doing kind of big store-wide discounts. So I think adjusting for your unit economics, understanding that you need to know your winning concepts kind of weeks before, and then looking at your creatives in the email campaigns, because ultimately these will target a big amount of your base. How are they relating to the social ads you're running? When we have our paid social designer and our email designer, they work off one Figma board. So it's, provided if a brand's on both services with us, it's just seamless in terms of kind of them touch points. So yeah, I think be consistent across all touch points, understand your unit economics with sale periods, and understand your winning concepts well ahead of the period.
Fantastic. That's a great point. So there's one piece to kind of finish up in terms of that kind of approach to Q4, I suppose. Um, again, it really depends on the goals. Are you seeing clients, like how would, maybe the better way to phrase it is, if you're working with clients who are looking to kind of make the most out of Q4, how would you recommend they balance that kind of spend and profitability conversation? Should they be kind of pushing for that overarching revenue number? Should they be looking to maybe do more for repeats? What's the kind of advice you'd give around kind of balancing both of those components, which naturally are kind of both a consideration for everyone to a certain extent?
Yeah, I think we always talk about that kind of golden percentage of revenue from Klaviyo should be around 30. I think that still remains the same over Black Friday. I think it depends on the type of business. There's certain brands where, that's going to be higher because the active customer base is coming back. Because you offer a nice discount. I think in terms of understanding the right type of spend, the way in which we do it here at Prosper is we always look at historic data. So what happened last year, what's happened through this year, and look at AMER as a metric because this is a great opportunity to acquire new customers. If you look at that AMER, which kind of boils down to new customer ROAS. What was that last year? How's that been impacted over big sales periods through the year? And what indicator does that give that we can spend this amount? Be understanding of that unit economics, and then I think that's how you can kind of judge how much you'll spend. Naturally, you can be reactive if it's going really well and Facebook's responding, then you can kind of see that spend kind of scale a little bit. But also be mindful that CPMs are going to increase over this period, so you're going to have to spend a little bit more for advertising anyway. So
Definitely.
yeah.
All fantastic points, but I think, as you said, if it can be grounded in their actual truths versus what they might see as a strategy that another brand is taken from the outside, if setting the using their previous data as a reference point is definitely the best place to start and kind of dig
Yeah,
in. So
absolutely.
yeah, as you mentioned, I know that kind of initial audit is probably going to be very beneficial for any potential clients and even to kind of get a lay of the land as to kind of where to move from there. So, yeah, well, look, really appreciate taking the time. I suppose just as we kind of close off, if anyone wants to get in touch as a brand, what's the best way of reaching out and maybe kind of engaging with Prospa?
Yeah, I'm Ollie Heum, Heum on LinkedIn. Just drop me a message on there. Always kind of chatting to new brands, yeah, each week. So yeah, reach us out on there or our website, prospermedia.co.uk. Get in touch.
Fantastic. Thanks, Sonny. Appreciate the time.
Cheers, Carl. Speak soon.